You might think they were burned, disbanded, and erased from history. But what about the nameless maps, the repeating symbols across centuries, and the secretive organizations that share the same strange structure? What if the Knights Templar never actually left? Tonight, let us journey back, not just through history, but through the shadows it left behind. We'll uncover the quiet traces of an order once feared, once forgotten, and perhaps never truly gone. This is Bedtime History, and tonight we follow the silent path of the Knights Templar. Perhaps no military organization in history has been shrouded in as much mysterious fog as the Knights Templar. They were not just warriors, but symbols of loyalty, financial power, and a strange demise that shocked all of medieval Europe. From their humble beginnings in Jerusalem in 1119 to their burning at the stake in Paris in 1314, every step left behind a trail of a story that history often tells only half of. But what remains? The silence is where the truth is hidden. In the beginning, they were only 9 men, no army, no wealth, no power, just an oath of austerity and a mission to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. Yet, within just a few decades, they owned massive fortresses, controlled the treasuries of several kingdoms, and created an information network, an influence that extended further than even the popes. How did such a small group of soldiers rise to such prominence? That is the first question history avoids answering clearly. Many ancient documents show that from the early years of their activity, the Templars were granted permission to establish their headquarters within the Temple Mount area, a sacred location believed to have once housed the Ark of the Covenant. This question cannot easily be dismissed, as during the final years of their operations, the Templars established secret trade relations with Muslim merchants, using their fleet to transport goods and information across the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coast. There are scattered documents from the 14th and 15th centuries referring to ships flying the Templar flag that did not belong to any kingdom, appearing off the coast of West Africa, later a launch point for Portuguese explorations. Another, even more astonishing hypothesis suggests that the maritime knowledge, ancient maps, and shipbuilding techniques that the Templars developed in secrecy were passed on to explorers like Henry the Navigator, the founder of Portugal's renowned maritime school. If this is true, then the Templars' role in the age of exploration was not accidental, it was deliberate. But they did not only leave their mark on the oceans. On land, many signs indicate that secret groups carrying the Templar spirit continued to operate. Then the Templars' role in the age of exploration was not accidental, it was deliberate. But they did not only leave their mark on the oceans. On land, many signs indicate that secret groups carrying the Templar spirit continued to operate. Architectural works built after the 14th century in Europe, from Gothic churches to town halls, bear symbols similar to Templar codes, 8-pointed stars, stylized crosses, or sun-moon diagrams. These symbols were not just decorative, they were codes, a way to recognize one another, a silent language saying, "We are still here." Another piece of evidence lies in the Codex Gigas, the enormous book known as the Devil's Bible, which contains several pages written in a peculiar cipher matching the documents the Templars once used. Medieval handwriting experts suggest that some sections of the Codex may have been transcribed by members of the Templar Order, particularly the parts discussing the silence period after the organization was officially excommunicated. So, why the silence? Why not rise up and reclaim their honor? The answer may lie in the profound nature of what they had discovered. If the Templars truly held knowledge, evidence, or a truth that the Church could not control, then silence was the ultimate form of protection. Silence to wait for the right time, silence to pass it down through generations. Generations who may not carry the Templar name, but still carry the spirit. And perhaps we are still living in a world they helped shape, only no one recognizes it. Throughout history, what cannot be destroyed often finds a way to be reborn in a different form, under a different name, but with its soul remaining intact. This is the unwritten law that the Templar Order followed. If they truly held knowledge beyond the scope of their time about finance, maritime navigation, strategy, and even theology, then their disappearance was merely a strategic move to avoid complete destruction, like a chess piece retreating to wait for the opportunity to counterattack. The Templars did not dissolve, they withdrew into the shadows. There is a subtle piece of evidence to this. The records of several popes from the 15th and 16th centuries, particularly Pope Sixtus IV, reveal that the Vatican allowed a group of old hermits to access the secret archives. These hermits were not officially called Templars, but their description is remarkably similar, dressed in white with black belts, living with discipline, and regularly exchanging letters in ciphers. Many modern scholars suspect that the Vatican knew full well that remnants of the Templars still existed, but an unspoken agreement had been established, a form of silence that served both sides' interests. The Vatican, the greatest center of Catholic power, living with discipline and regularly exchanging letters in ciphers. Many modern scholars suspect that the Vatican knew full well that remnants of the Templars still existed, but an unspoken agreement had been established, a form of silence that served both sides' interests. The Vatican, the greatest center of Catholic power, could not allow an external organization like the Templars to threaten its orthodoxy, yet, at the same time, it could not completely erase what the Templars had brought: banking, commerce, strategies for protecting the faithful, and especially secret knowledge of ancient documents from Jerusalem. Therefore, silence was the only peace agreement that could keep everything in balance. No one officially acknowledged their existence, but no one openly hunted them down either. There is a lesser-known event in history that carries profound significance. In 1517, Martin Luther initiated the Protestant Reformation, challenging the monopoly of the Church. In the early years of the movement, he received mysterious support from a group of German nobles willing to provide both financial backing and sanctuary. Some scholars believe these individuals, who had once owned property managed by the Templars, were indirect descendants of the order. They did not oppose the Vatican out of hatred, but to restore a pure faith, free from the control of a niche organization. The influence of the Templars did not stop at religion. During the French Revolution in the late 18th century, many revolutionary leaders were members of secret societies, with Freemasonry being the largest. The symbols on flags, crests, and architecture from this period all echo Templar iconography, from the eight-pointed star and the mystical circle to the layout of Parliament halls along an east-west axis, similar to the chapels the Templars once built. If we delve deeper into the ancient urban maps of Paris, we notice something strange. The main axis of many state buildings is designed to align with the sunrise on the summer solstice, a detail commonly found in Templar architecture. This is no coincidence. Such traces can only be intentional historical memories carved into stone, meant to remain undisturbed by mere words. So, why have the Templars always been associated with conspiracy theories, demonic symbols, and mystical rituals? Mostly, this is a product of the 19th and 20th centuries, a time when the West was swept up in the romanticization of history. Novels, legends, and films have painted the Templars as guardians of the Holy Grail or devil worshippers, but that is mere fiction. The real truth is the fear that powerful organizations feel when confronted by a group of people trained to think independently, act on their own principles, and refuse to submit to authority if it contradicts their ideals. The real truth is the fear that powerful organizations feel when confronted by a group of people trained to think independently, act on their own principles, and refuse to submit to authority if it contradicts their ideals. Over 700 years after the Templars were disbanded, the name Templar has not died. It lives in symbols, in charitable organizations, in secret societies, and in the unanswered questions. What did they find under the Temple Mount? What did they bring back to Europe? And most importantly, who is holding that secret today? There is one often underrated aspect when discussing the Knights Templar. Their role was not only in battle or in managing treasuries, it also lay in the intellectual and legal foundations of medieval Europe. Unlike other monastic orders, the Templars had a network of internal schools where knights not only learned martial skills but also mathematics, cryptography, geography, Roman law, and languages. To many, the Templars resembled more of an elite academy than a military force. One of the lesser-known facts is that many modern concepts of property rights and inheritance stemmed from the Templars' estate management model. The Templars set up rigorous systems of written records to prove ownership, something not common in their time. They required all land transactions to be documented, sealed, and stored at a central office, much of which was later discovered in French, Italian, and German monasteries. This system directly influenced modern European civil law. Moreover, the concept of a trust, wherein an individual entrusts their assets to an organization to manage with the promise of full restitution, was practiced by the Templars with thousands of pilgrims, merchants, and even nobles. They were the most trusted custodians of the era, and this model, legally, was a precursor to modern central banking. This made them not just an army, but a social coordination apparatus. The Templars' legal expertise was not incidental. Some of the order's elders had studied at the University of Bologna and Paris, two of the largest academic centers of the Middle Ages. They applied that knowledge to build an organizational structure, a non-religious, non-royal operating system based solely on merit and loyalty. And that, too, is why the European nobility feared them. An autonomous organization not beholden to the church nor to any king, but deeply loved by the people and naturally influential. The consequence when the Templar order was destroyed, it was not only the knights who were burned alive, but also the knowledge that was burned to the ground. Many small Templar libraries, which held maps, ancient books, and medical manuscripts from the East, were hunted down and burnt. But bolder hypotheses suggest they crossed the Atlantic to lands that had yet to appear on any European maps. Based on the strange symbols found in Roslin Chapel, some researchers believe the Knights had crude maps of what is now Canada, possibly through secret trade with late-era Vikings or North African Muslims. If this is true, then the Templars may have reached the New World nearly 200 years before Columbus set sail, and that might explain the urgency of their suppression, not just for their wealth or heretical leanings, but because they held a truth. If this is true, then the Templars may have reached the New World nearly 200 years before Columbus set sail. This might explain the urgency of their suppression, not just for their wealth or heretical leanings, but because they held a truth capable of upending the Christian world order. For if the Vatican were to acknowledge a world beyond Europe, the Middle East and North Africa, then the entire doctrine of Rome as the center of the universe would be shaken. That's why ancient maps like the Piri Reis, the Zeno map, or the Vinland map, all of which depict Western lands with uncanny precision, continue to baffle historians. While definitive proof remains elusive, the strange coincidence is that these maps either originated from or were restored in places once tied to Templar activity. Perhaps those ships never sank. They're just waiting for another century, another age, to return. The deeper we journey into the legacy of the Templars, the clearer one truth becomes. The Order did not only leave behind stone ruins, ancient manuscripts, or crests. They left behind a model, a method of existing on the fringes of official power, yet profoundly influencing its core. That model was absorbed, replicated, and adapted by other organizations, most notably the secret societies of the West, with Freemasonry standing as the prime example. The parallels between the two are too striking to be mere coincidence. From hierarchical structure, ritual systems, and geometric symbolism to the ideals of intellect, discipline, and brotherhood. While there is no definitive proof that Freemasonry is a direct descendant of the Templar Order, numerous 18th century sources assert that a Templar tradition was passed on in silence through generations. This is further supported by certain Masonic lodges in Germany, Scotland, and France that claim to be reformed Templar branches, not just in symbols but in spiritual syncretism and their quiet resistance to centralized authority. Documents from the Strict Observance Lodge in 18th century Germany detail initiation rites that included oaths of loyalty to the spirit of the Holy Temple and to an anonymous order that transcends time. These writings shook the scholarly world of the 19th century and forced historians to revisit the theory that the Templars never truly vanished. They simply changed the way their ideals were passed on. Adding to this mystery is the recurring appearance of Templar symbols during revolutions. The red flag of the French Revolution matched the color of the Templar cloaks. The revolutionaries' secretive oaths in candle-lit stone chambers, pledging themselves to a supreme ideal, strongly resembled the rituals once practiced by the order. Even the famous motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, can be symbols during revolutions, like the red flag of the French Revolution, matched the color of the Templar cloaks. The revolutionaries' secretive oaths, taken in candle-lit stone chambers while pledging themselves to a supreme ideal, strongly resembled the rituals once practiced by the order. Even the famous motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, can be read as a modern reworking of the three core Templar virtues, loyalty, brotherhood, and wisdom, Then, scattered across 19th century documents from America to France, emerges a haunting phrase: the silent architects. They are described as those who stand behind the great movements of the world, leaving no trace. Scholars such as Albert Pike, himself a member of secret societies, hinted that the organizational knowledge, symbols, and administrative blueprints of modern institutions, from central banks to parliaments, were influenced by an ancient prototype, the Knights Templar. If they are indeed present, their presence is not in proclamations or public parades. It is found in the way societies are structured, in flexible yet tiered systems of power, in the ideal of an order above orders, and in symbols that may seem decorative yet carry silent historical weight. It is precisely for this reason that many powers in the 20th century began to try to redefine the Templar image. From cinema and novels to conspiracy theories, the Templars were pulled into the public imagination as a captivating name, but twisted into fantastical tropes. Demon worshippers, secret assassins, puppet masters of global chaos. Yet these images run counter to what history actually shows: a disciplined order, rich in ideals and fiercely loyal to the truth they believed in, even when that truth led them to burn at the stake. They were vilified not because of crimes, but because their enduring influence made new powers uneasy. The best way to erase a legacy that cannot be destroyed is to make the public doubt it ever mattered. And so, instead of learning from what the Templars left behind, the modern world seems to know them only through distortions. Yet, if we listen closely enough, if we look carefully enough, we can still find them in the ways societies silently structure power, in the symbols that repeat across centuries, and in that strange chill we feel when we step into an ancient chapel where light slants through a stone dome, a quiet reminder that something greater than official power once existed and never truly left. The 21st century, for all its technological advancements, has proven to be the era in which old ghosts are most easily awakened. As national libraries began digitizing their archives, as universities expanded access to ancient manuscripts, and as AI-powered tools grew capable of decoding the ciphers once used. The 21st century, for all its technological advancements, has proven to be the era in which old ghosts are most easily awakened. As national libraries began digitizing their archives, universities expanded access to ancient manuscripts, and AI-powered tools grew capable of decoding the ciphers once used to obscure forbidden knowledge. The name Templar began to resurface. This resurgence occurred not through the language of religion or legend, but through the lens of science. In 2011, a research team from the University of Leuven in Belgium published a discovery that barely made headlines. A handwritten 14th century document stored in the Vatican archives revealed an internal investigation led by Pope Clement V. What's astonishing is that this document, now known as the Chinon Parchment, contained no confirmed charges of heresy against the Templar order. On the contrary, it showed that Clement had privately absolved Jacques de Molay and other senior knights. In other words, the Vatican never officially condemned the Templars, but under pressure from the King of France, the document was sealed and hidden for over 700 years. So, if the Templars were never truly guilty, but rather pawns in a purge driven by financial and political interests, then everything we've been told about their crimes is the product of deliberate propaganda. In that light, What remains are the encrypted letters, the stone reliefs, and the sealed parchments. These are not just remnants of history, but the final testimony of an organization that was never granted a fair trial. At around the same time, an independent German researcher named Erich von Däniken uncovered a set of ancient maritime charts in Bremen, believed to originate from La Rochelle, the former base of the Templar fleet. These maps, drawn in rusted iron ink and filled with unfamiliar symbols for the period, charted a transatlantic route to a place labeled Terra Incognita Occidentalis. Beneath one of the maps was a faint Latin phrase, Deus vult et silentium, God wills it, even in silence. That phrase echoes the Templar motto, Non nobis Domine, non nobis, sed nomini tuo da gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but to your name give glory. It is a quiet declaration that if the order could no longer fight openly, it would continue its mission in silence, but with the same purpose. Meanwhile, a team of archaeologists in southern France unearthed a hidden chamber beneath an old fortress near Carcassonne. Inside, they found no gold, no weapons, only handwritten manuscripts, small stone sculptures, and scrolls of leather documenting organizational codes, lunar calendars, and star maps rendered with astonishing precision. Most shocking of all, among these scrolls was a replicated version of a lost work by Ptolemy describing the American coastline. A fool, they found no gold, no weapons, only handwritten manuscripts, small stone sculptures, and scrolls of leather documenting organizational codes, lunar calendars, and star maps rendered with astonishing precision. Most shocking of all among these scrolls was a replicated version of a lost work by Ptolemy describing the American coastline a full century before it was discovered by the world. Scattered fragments, seemingly random symbols, but when linked together, they reveal a broader map, one in which the Templars never disappeared, but retreated into the underground chambers of knowledge. They were no longer guardians of the Holy Land, but guardians of truth, the kind of truth that power so often seeks to distort. This leads to one sobering question. If the inheritors of the Templar legacy still exist, where would we find them in today's world? Perhaps they no longer wear white cloaks, bear swords, or build castles, but maybe they are the guardians of knowledge in libraries, the dissenting voices in parliaments, the architects of humanitarian organizations, those who choose to live in the shadows to protect the light. There is a strange truth, though. Born in the heart of medieval Europe, the legacy of the Knights Templar appears in places far beyond what one might imagine, both geographically and culturally. Not just in France, England, or Portugal, but in Ethiopia, the Middle East, and even among the ancient ruins of pre-Columbian America. These traces are not mere coincidences. They are evidence of a quiet yet systematic network of influence. In Ethiopia, ancient manuscripts from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church mention white-cloaked warriors from the west visiting Aksum around the 13th century. They were received as divine emissaries, and in folk descriptions they bore crosses, answered to no pope, and prayed facing the rising sun. Strangely, in some of the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, the Templar cross is still faintly visible beneath the original plaster, a detail no one has been able to fully explain. In the Middle East, the ruins of Crac de Chevalier, a crusader fortress once occupied by the Templars, still display engraved crosses and Latin inscriptions. But even more surprising are the geometric symbols etched into the walls, 8 pointed stars and interlocking circles, identical to the symbols used by later secret societies in Europe. Local Muslims once referred to them with an unusual respect as Al-Furan al-Yad, the White Knights. Such reverence from a former enemy suggests a legacy more complex than just conquest. In the Americas, anthropologists have uncovered motifs strikingly similar to Templar symbols in the stone reliefs of the Taino people in the Caribbean. Some of these include stylized crosses surrounded by solar and lunar patterns, the same imagery carved into a former enemy suggests a legacy more complex than just conquest in the Americas. Anthropologists have uncovered motifs strikingly similar to Templar symbols in the stone reliefs of the Taino people in the Caribbean. Some of these include stylized crosses surrounded by solar and lunar patterns, the same imagery carved into the ceiling of Roslin Chapel. Could it be that the vanished ships of the Templar fleet once made contact across the Atlantic, leaving behind cultural imprints that spoke no words? In Peru, the Italian explorer Pedro de la Vallever recorded in 1621 that he encountered a group of natives who claimed to be descendants of warriors from the east, dressed in white armor and bearing a cross flag. While modern historians debate the authenticity of this account, the consistency in detail raises another possibility, that the Templars' influence extended beyond trade or warfare into symbols, rituals, and belief systems. This leads to a larger question. If the Templars did make contact with civilizations outside the Old World, they may have been the first to initiate a kind of spiritual globalization, an exchange of symbols, knowledge, and rites. Long before empires began to conquer, there was no official proclamation, but perhaps the Templars sought to build a network of sacred resonance, not through dominance, but through cultural harmony. In the now lost records of the 1296 Templar Council in Portugal, there is a curious line describing a westward voyage to the land where the light never fades. No one knows its true meaning, but many believe it refers to a mythical land, possibly the Americas, or perhaps a philosophical idea, a place uncorrupted by power and rigid dogma. We may never know what is absolutely true, but one thing is certain. The Templars never saw themselves as mere tools of Rome or the crown. They viewed themselves as stewards of a legacy that transcended borders, and that, more than anything, is what made them dangerous to the powers of their time. Today, when we stumble upon mysterious carvings etched in ancient stone, when long-forgotten maps resurface thanks to digital restoration, or when a whisper of old Latin echoes through a distant chapel, perhaps we are not simply witnessing fragments of history, but standing in the fading footprints of a silent, grand journey begun by those once known as the Knights Templar. The 20th century, defined by war, revolution, and technology, hardly seemed like a world built for medieval knights, and yet, strangely, it was during this very age of industrialization and modernity that the name Templar re-emerged, not on battlefields or within chapels, but in shadowy meeting rooms, secret summits, and whispered conversations among politicians, scholars, and philosophers. In 1935, during a secret conference in Munich, an internal document circulated within a theosophical political society known as the Thule Society. Within it, an entire chapter was dedicated to analyzing the Templar model as a prototype for the ideal organization: disciplined, softly hierarchical, non-territorial, and tied to a belief system beyond secular law. This was a time when new regimes were desperate for powerful symbols to justify their rule, and among the symbols they reached for was the Red Cross of the Templars. During World War II, some German special units wore the Red Cross insignia on their sleeves, distinctly different from the broken swastika of the Nazi Party. This was no accident. Many high-ranking SS officers, especially those immersed in myth and symbolism, believed the Templars held secrets of sacred bloodlines and the order of intellectual warriors. They led excavations in Languedoc, Roussillon, and the Pyrenees, convinced the Templars had hidden knowledge or relics in those regions. But this reckless exploitation pushed the Templar image into a dangerous dimension, one of authoritarian manipulation and supremacist ideology. Perhaps, if any true inheritors of the Templar spirit still existed at the time, they chose silence. They could not align with a perverted vision. The Templars of the 12th century never killed to defend a dogma. They fought to protect pilgrims, not to expand empires. After the war, in 1945, a private Swiss library yielded a mysterious manuscript titled Liber Silentium, the Book of Silence. Written in a mixture of Latin, Old French, and Middle High German, though much of it remains cryptic, one passage sparked wide debate. When the world forgets faith, we shall return, not with swords, but with memory. Many believe this was a silent manifesto by a group of Templar descendants who had operated as an underground intellectual network during the war. In the 1960s, a decade of countercultural awakening, the Templar spirit rose once more, this time as a symbol of the yearning for spiritual order beyond rigid systems. In Paris, Florence, and Prague, philosophical groups held conferences under the theme knighthood and freedom. In their discussions, they compared the Templar model with modern society, a vision where individuals could live for ideals, not for material pressure, where obedience came not from coercion, but from understanding. From then on, the name Templar slowly returned to academic discourse, no longer as a distant legend, but as a discussions compared the Templar model with modern society, envisioning a world where individuals could live for ideals, not material pressure, and where obedience stemmed from understanding, not coercion. From then on, the name Templar slowly returned to academic discourse, no longer as a distant legend, but as a reminder that an organization once existed that transcended feudalism, clerical power, and personal ambition to live, fight, and protect an ideal that the modern world seems to be forgetting. They did not return through force, but through the awakening of a generation searching for meaning in a world where all values seemed commodified and technology dictated truth. Perhaps that is their deepest legacy, not treasure, not ancient maps, but a way of life, a way to face power without losing the self. In the dark night of the 20th century, when the world seemed lost, the silent shadow of the Templars returned, not to make history, but to remind history that some values never belong to the past. The 21st century did not begin with war, it began with a structural transformation from a material world to a world of data. In that shift, the most surprising thing wasn't the disappearance of ancient institutions, but the resurrection of ideas. Ideas once burned at the stake in the 14th century are now finding fertile ground within the decentralized, free, and anonymous architecture of the digital age. What once made the Knights Templar a target of suppression, financial independence, transnational operations, organizational autonomy beyond political control, and ideals that transcended religious authority have today become admired traits, actively recreated in new forms. It's not difficult to see that within the structures of blockchain networks, the operations of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and even in the visions of modern tech founders, the outline of a Templar mindset is reappearing. Take Bitcoin, for example, a financial network independent of any central bank, governed by transparency, fairness, and immutability. Isn't that the very dream the Templars once explored through their medieval pilgrim checks? The Templars pioneered a system that allowed travelers to transfer wealth without carrying gold, relying instead on encrypted notes and secure monastery stations. They encoded, verified, and distributed credit in a way the modern world is only now beginning to fully understand. Similarly, the way the Templars built their internal information systems using symbols, hand signals, geometric ciphers, and networks of sworn brotherhood mirrors, today's approach to distributed security and information privacy, fragmented yet connected, anonymous yet transparent. It was this structure that allowed the Templars to survive for 2 centuries, and it's becoming a blueprint for today's digital society. Symbols, hand signals, geometric ciphers, and networks of sworn brotherhood mirror today's approach to distributed security and information privacy. They are fragmented yet connected, anonymous yet transparent. It was this structure that allowed the Templars to survive for 2 centuries, and it's becoming a blueprint for today's digital society. Within this digital world, another phenomenon is unfolding: the return of symbols on online platforms. Users have begun reviving Templar crosses, 8-pointed stars, and old Latin mottos. For most, these are aesthetic choices or style statements. But among certain small private groups, these symbols are seen as something far more, a conscious inheritance of the Templar spirit. One such group, calling itself Ordo Veritatis, the Order of Truth, was mentioned in a 2021 German sociology paper. Though it operates discreetly, the group declares in its manifesto, "We do not worship, we preserve. We do not fight, we warn. We do not rule, we protect what is right from being forgotten." Remarkably, all their activities take place within decentralized encrypted networks, operating with fluid, non-hierarchical structures, almost exactly how the Templars were organized 8 centuries ago. Even in academic circles, Templar studies have surged since the early 2000s. Many documents once locked away by the Vatican are now being released under growing pressure from the scholarly community. Historians like Barbara Frail and Alan Deers have gone further, proposing that the Templars were not just products of the Crusades, but manifestations of a perpetual counter-authoritarian tendency in human history. Whenever society is crushed by concentrated power, an organization like the Templars will re-emerge in new form, but with the same core ideals. In a world where information is controlled, where individual freedom is threatened by algorithms and corporate monopolies, ancient symbols have become spiritual anchors. Perhaps this is no accident of nostalgia. Perhaps it is collective historical memory whispering that once there was a group that did not bow to power, that lived for a timeless ideal, and that when the age demands it, they will return, not with swords, not with white cloaks, but with principles so deeply etched into the human spirit that no force can erase them. In the heart of Rome, behind towering walls and gilded gates, the Vatican still stands, not only as the center of faith, but as one of the greatest repositories of human knowledge the world has ever known. Over 80 kilometers of shelves hold ancient manuscripts, encrypted letters, records of heresies, and the diplomatic correspondences of empires, all resting in near total silence. But not everything has been forgotten. Some fragments, faint as they may be, are beginning to slip into the light. Ancient manuscripts, encrypted letters, records of heresies, and the diplomatic correspondences of empires, all resting in near total silence. But not everything has been forgotten. Some fragments, faint as they may be, are beginning to slip into the light, and at the center of this seismic shift, once again, is the name Templar. In 2001, Italian historian Barbara Frail uncovered a document misfiled for nearly 7 centuries within the Vatican secret archives. Known as the Pergamentum Chinon, or the Chinon parchment, it is the official record of an investigation personally conducted by Pope Clement V in 1308, shortly after the mass arrest of the Knights Templar across France. What it revealed shook the foundation of official church history. In the document, Clement did not condemn the Templars as heretics. On the contrary, he granted them absolution, writing in the solemn language of the papacy, "Because their confessions were extracted through torture, and because they acted without malicious intent, we grant them pardon." Had this been made public at the time, it might have saved hundreds of knights from the flames. Instead, it was sealed away for reasons the Vatican has never explained. Why? Because if the Templars were innocent, then every manhunt, every trial, every charred body in the public square becomes a crime of systemic injustice. And beyond that, if they were innocent, then their treasure, their rituals, and the knowledge they preserved were not heretical relics, but sacred legacies of the Church itself, abandoned by the very institution meant to protect them. Following this revelation, researchers began demanding access to other Vatican files relating to the Templar Order. Piece by piece, a new picture emerged. Secret reports from papal envoys in the Middle East documenting Templar efforts not only in battle, but in building hospitals, schools, and negotiating ceasefires with Muslim leaders, a direct contradiction to the fanatical crusader image they had long been assigned. In 2017, a symposium at Oxford University titled Non-Ecclesial Religious Orders in the Medieval World presented a controversial conclusion. The Templars were not merely a military monastic order, but an early form of supra-church structure where power did not flow from hierarchy, but from voluntary submission to a sacred ideal. They lived by discipline, not decree. They served justice and faith without allegiance to throne or mitre. If accepted, this view would radically reshape our understanding of church history. The Vatican, though it has not formally restored the Templars' honor, has begun to quietly acknowledge them. Some manuscripts once buried in sealed vaults have been displayed in academic exhibitions, and in recent papal addresses one hears words of reconciliation. Let us learn from the mistakes of the past, so we do not burn. Although the Church has not formally restored the Templars' honor, it has begun to quietly acknowledge them. Some manuscripts, once buried in sealed vaults, have been displayed in academic exhibitions. In recent papal addresses, one hears words of reconciliation. Let us learn from the mistakes of the past, so we do not burn those we were meant to protect. Perhaps the strongest restoration, however, hasn't come from the Church, but from the public. Documentaries, podcasts, academic lectures, and freely published research online have brought the Templars back into collective memory. They are remembered not as shadowy conspirators, but as a symbol of suppressed ideals. In an age where old institutions are being scrutinized, the image of white-cloaked warriors standing at the crossroads of morality and power feels more relevant than ever. Perhaps we don't need the Templars to return with swords. We only need them to return in spirit, to stand with the truth when all else remains silent. At a deeper level of history, there are stories that do not need to be written down to endure. They require no chronicles, no titles, no medals, because they live in choices. The Knights Templar, burned, buried, and distorted through the centuries, ultimately survived because of this. They became a spiritual choice, not for a select few, but for anyone in any era standing at the crossroads between loyalty to ideals and submission to power. Look closely. The most effective humanitarian organizations aren't always the ones with billion-dollar budgets or global fame. They are often small, agile, bonded by trust, sharing knowledge as if it were sacred currency, just as the Templars did 8 centuries ago. In an age where information is a weapon and morality is commodified, the rebirth of the Templar spirit isn't about looking backward. It's about reawakening something that was once true and may be true again today. As we face new kinds of crossroads, justice versus censorship, truth versus propaganda, wisdom versus manipulation, we don't need knights with swords. We need people with a knight's spirit, those who understand that in the battle between light and shadow, the personal choice is not just a matter of ethics. It is the making of history. And if there is one thing worthy of being called the final secret of the Templar Order, perhaps it is this. They left no manual, no doctrine. They left a question, a single, eternal question. When the world turns its back on truth, what will you do? When the Templar Order was officially dissolved in the early 14th century, it seemed that every path they had walked was cut off, every stronghold seized, every leader executed or exiled. But there was one thing neither the Pope, the King of France, nor the clergy of the time could control: the sea. Though scarcely mentioned in official history, the Templars possessed one of the largest commercial and military fleets of the medieval world. Anchored at the port of La Rochelle, the Templars were not only knights and monks, they were sailors, explorers, and traders. And on the very night before the mass arrest of October 1307, their fleet, over a dozen large ships, quietly slipped away and was never recorded again. So where did those ships go? Over the following century, scattered reports from Atlantic coastal merchants spoke of cross-bearing ships, loyal to no crown, appearing in the waters off Ireland, along the West African coast, and even farther still. The sailors wore plain grey robes with no insignia, spoke in ancient Latin, and paid with coins that bore no king's face. Atlantic coastal merchants spoke of cross-bearing ships, loyal to no crown, appearing in the waters off Ireland, along the West African coast, and even farther still. The sailors wore plain grey robes with no insignia, spoke in ancient Latin, and paid with coins that bore no king's face. They didn't stay long, didn't claim land, they simply passed through as if charting a route. Portuguese traders had a name for them, os navegantes silenciosos, the silent sailors. But the most intriguing clues lie across the ocean. In the 15th century, when European explorers officially set foot in the Americas, they encountered native communities, particularly in northeastern Canada and the Yucatan Peninsula, that bore symbols resembling the cross, inexplicable by local culture. Some Spanish missionaries even recorded that the Taíno and the Maya told stories of pale-skinned visitors from the Eastern Ocean wearing long garments and praying to the sun. Was it fantasy or a whispered memory of contact long before history ever admitted it? Another thread leads to Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built in the 15th century and filled with unmistakable Templar symbols. Carved into its pillars are detailed depictions of maize and aloe, two plants entirely unknown in Europe prior to Columbus's voyage. If the architects of Rosslyn had seen and touched them, they must have been brought back through a secret journey, perhaps the last voyage of the Templars, who vanished from La Rochelle. It was not an invasion, it was a final whisper, the last echo of a sacred mission betrayed, distorted, and forced into silence. A mission that never truly died, it simply changed the direction of its sails. In an era when words could get you burned at the stake, survival depended on what could not be spoken. After being branded heretics, the Templars lost more than power and property, they lost the ability to name themselves. But within that silence, a new language emerged, the language of symbols. If you've ever stepped into an old chapel and noticed an 8-pointed flower carved into a pillar, a square nested in a circle, or a tilted hollow cross, then you may have entered a space where the Templars once stood. They left no proclamations. They left images, visible to the eye, elusive to the mind. Symbols as codes, and codes as knowledge, reserved only for those who carry memory. Unlike academic language, Templar symbolism doesn't divide the initiated from the uninitiated. It is reserved for those who have undergone an inner awakening, for those who recognize that coincidence is often a signal, a single line connecting two ceiling points at Rosslyn, a misaligned tile in an old monastery courtyard, or a statue deliberately placed off-axis from the light. All are ways in which the Templars whispered through time, "We are still here." Their most iconic symbol, the Red Cross, was never as purely religious as many assume. In the Order's original thinking, it stood for the 4 directions, the willingness to walk toward truth no matter where it led. Some accounts suggest the cross was chosen not because of Christ, but because it was a geometric representation of intersection, where the sacred meets the worldly, where spirit meets flesh. It was not a pledge to fight, but a vow to live wholly between two realms. They also used the 8-pointed star, sometimes called the seal of Melchizedek, not as mystical flair, but as a reminder that the path of righteousness is never linear. They understood that power rotates, but truth does not, and that fidelity to truth often requires walking through the shadows. Today, Templar symbols still appear in modern architecture, in the stained glass of French cathedrals, in the stone tiling of old halls in Portugal, and yet few realize that many of these symbols have been repurposed without memory of their origin. The logos of certain banks, humanitarian organizations, even international security agencies carry design elements rooted in Templar geometry, dual symmetry, minimalist structure, precision with light. This raises a question: coincidence, or perhaps consciously or unconsciously, have those who built these structures continued a forgotten lineage of knowledge? The logos of certain banks, humanitarian organizations, and even international security agencies carry design elements rooted in Templar geometry, dual symmetry, minimalist structure, and precision with light. This raises a question: coincidence, or perhaps consciously or unconsciously, have those who built these structures continued a forgotten lineage of knowledge? Some symbolists argue that the collective unconscious is only possible when memory has been long and deep enough to sustain it. By turning symbols into enduring codes, the Templars crafted a language that transcended censorship and time. Because of that, even if every text was burned, they would still remain in stone, in light, in structure. Today, no one is burned alive for their beliefs, at least not by fire. But there are other forms of burning, by media, by politics, by oblivion. In such a world, the Templars' most precious legacy may not be a specific truth, but a method for truth's survival through metaphor, image, and silent resistance. This may explain why, upon entering an ancient space where sunlight filters through a star-shaped window, something inside us grows still, and we don't know why. Perhaps because some part of us remembers. It remembers that once there was an order that did not speak with words, but with symbols, that never shouted, but always spoke true silence. There is one thing every civilization leaves behind: memory. Not just what is written or carved in stone, but something passed on through feeling, through the strange reflexes of the human mind, when standing before something larger than itself, something it cannot name. The Templars somehow stepped into that memory. You don't need to be a historian to recognize it. Just stand in an old chapel where light cuts through a stone window shaped like an 8-petaled flower, landing perfectly on a small symbol carved into the floor, and you'll feel it. Not the light, not the architecture, but memory. Not your own, but something older, as if the place itself remembers. Modern scholars sometimes call this the phenomenon of stone memory, the belief that ancient structures are not just architecture, but non-verbal recording devices. Every symbol, every shaft of light, every golden ratio, calculated not just for beauty, but to transmit something that cannot be spoken. The Templars were one of the few medieval orders to truly understand this. They didn't build temples, they encoded memory in stone. At the Templar fortress of Tomar in Portugal, the circular central chapel is designed in perfect proportion to the legendary Temple of Solomon. The window placements, the angles of light, and the surrounding corridors mirror the solar cycle on the summer solstice. Standing in the main hall, sunlight from the east. The Templar fortress of Tomar in Portugal features a circular central chapel designed in perfect proportion to the legendary Temple of Solomon. The window placements, angles of light, and surrounding corridors mirror the solar cycle on the summer solstice. Standing in the main hall, sunlight from the east pierces 2 layers of stone columns and casts a red cross onto the floor. This is no coincidence. It's a reminder that there are moments in the year when light and shadow balance, and in those moments, the keepers of memory must be awake. People often ask why the Templars didn't write more, why no manifestos, no doctrines, no great books. The answer may be simple, because they didn't trust words. Words can be twisted, burned, or misread. Instead, they chose to write in structure, in light, in symbols, things that cannot be altered unless the entire building is destroyed. Indeed, though countless manuscripts were burned, their fortresses, chapels, and storehouses still stand. Though no one wears the white cloak now, the light still falls on the old symbols in the right place at the right time, as if a timeless memory continues to whisper across centuries. But more than that, Templar memory isn't just embedded in stone, it lives in people. It's in the way someone pauses at the sound of wind echoing through a stone corridor, or in how a child places their hand on a symbol they've never been taught, yet somehow feels familiar. It is a kind of inherited memory without genetics, a shared resonance that transcends language and dogma. Today, in a world programmed by data, we've forgotten how to remember through structure. Everything must have format tags, binary encoding. In that, humanity may be losing something vital, a sense of the sacred that cannot be defined. And when we lose that, we begin to lose our orientation. The Templars somehow once held that orientation steady, not with maps, but with light, not with words, but with form. Perhaps their true legacy is not buried treasure, but the ability to remind the world of what it has forgotten. That truth does not need to be shouted, it only needs to arrive at the right moment, in silence. When the Templar order was extinguished in the early 14th century, their end did not come in a glorious battle. It came in the damp corridors of the Inquisition courts and on the ashen pyres of Paris. There were no trumpets, no medals of honor, only accusations read in a cold voice, confessions extracted under torture, and bodies burned along with centuries of knowledge buried in smoke and cinders. And yet, strangely, no one truly hated them. On the ashes of Paris, there were no trumpets, no medals of honor. Instead, accusations were read in a cold voice, confessions extracted under torture, and bodies burned, along with centuries of knowledge buried in smoke and cinders. Yet, strangely, no one truly hated them. The public once loved the Templars. They protected pilgrim routes, built hospitals, and distributed food during war. Popes granted them privileges, and royal houses entrusted them with vast estates. So, what turned them from heroes into dangerous heretics almost overnight? As with all turning points in history, the answer lies where power and debt intersect. Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, was a king of grand ambition but empty coffers, drained by costly wars with England and Flanders. Desperate for funds, he looked toward the Templars, an organization not only wealthy but immune to royal control. Their assets lay beyond the king's grasp, and their ledgers were free from court scrutiny. Worse still, he owed them a fortune. Philip knew he couldn't defeat the Templars by force. They had fortresses and influence enough to resist, but if he could recast them as enemies of the faith, no one would defend them. And so a meticulous scheme unfolded. Accusations of heresy, strange rituals, worship of a mysterious idol named Baphomet, and confessions twisted by torture. Pope Clement V, initially hesitant, eventually bowed under the pressure of the French crown, and the Templars were brought before the world as criminals. Yet, in that moment, cast out by both church and throne, the Templars became something more than an order. They became a symbol, not because they were entirely innocent, not because they were always right, but because they dared to exist outside the centralized order. They refused to kneel. What few know is this: when the arrests began, not all of the Templars' knowledge or wealth was seized. Many of their libraries, coffers, maps, and intellectual treasures had been relocated in advance. Records suggest that in the weeks leading up to the mass arrests of October 13th, 1307, Templar delegations quietly withdrew from key command posts in Paris, Milan, and Lyon. No one knows where they went, but many believe they were warned from within. This raises a question. Was someone inside the Vatican or the French court secretly opposed to the purge and helped them escape? Centuries later, in an old monastery in Luberon, southern France, a handwritten manuscript was discovered in ancient Latin. It detailed emergency meetings held by Templar elders in the final days before their downfall. One passage in particular struck historians. "We will not resist. The enemy requires an execution, not a war." In Luberon, southern France, a handwritten manuscript was discovered in ancient Latin. It detailed emergency meetings held by Templar elders in the final days before their downfall. One passage in particular struck historians. "We will not resist. The enemy requires an execution, not a war. Let them believe we are finished. While the fire still burns, the seed will quietly take root elsewhere." If authentic, the manuscript reveals that the Templars, in their last hours, chose to sacrifice the surface to preserve the core. They vanished from the pages of official history to survive in the shadows of memory. That choice opened one of the most enigmatic chapters of their story, the era of anonymity. After the purge, all formal traces of the Templar order were erased. But those who remembered their ideals, their structure, their symbols, began to regroup under new forms. They no longer used the name Templar, but they swore allegiance to truth, to knowledge, and to a core principle: live without kneeling, die without betrayal. And if there is one final secret the forces that destroyed the Templars never understood, it is this: they didn't just extinguish an organization, they helped give birth to a legend. And once a legend lives in the minds of the people, it never dies. When history speaks of the Knights Templar, it often conjures images of men in white cloaks, mounted on horseback, fighting for their faith. But there is one truth nearly erased from collective memory: the women. They are not mentioned in the official chronicles. Their names do not appear on elder councils. No stone fortress bears their likeness. And yet, if you listen closely to the whispers of time, you'll find them everywhere. Handwritten letters have been discovered, signed not with names but with rose symbols, sent from a sister, fluent in the old Templar tongue. These letters describe how to conceal documents, how to use floral encryption, and how to recognize one another through a breath behind the eyes, a non-verbal signal only taught from childhood within the order. Unlike the knights, they did not swear loyalty with swords, but with memory. Some women's religious orders in Spain and Provence still hold an odd ritual once a year on October 13th. They light 7 candles on a stone table, recite a passage in ancient Latin, and sit in complete silence for exactly 24 minutes. No one could explain the ritual until it was aligned with the date of the mass arrest of the Templars, October 13th. It was not a memorial, it was encoded memory passed silently through generations. Modern history often forgets women's roles in great upheavals, but it is in the quiet spaces history overlooks that we find them, not as witnesses, but as keepers of the breath of truth. If the Templars survived across centuries, it is largely thanks to those who wore no armor, wielded no blade, yet carried a memory sharper than any manuscript. Today, in independent Templar study circles, women scholars are leading the efforts to decode symbols, interpret encrypted language, and organize conferences on the unspoken role of women in preserving the Templar legacy. This is not just overdue recognition, it is proof of something the Templars understood long ago. No war is ever truly lost if memory is preserved, and sometimes those who preserve memory do not need to speak. They need only to be there at the right moment, in the right place, so that the flame never dies. History, as we know it, is always written by the victors, but some memories are too vast, too quiet, and too dangerous for anyone to ever dare write them down again. These are not the memories found in books. They exist behind the scaffolding of society itself, in the hidden architecture. We know it is always written by the victors, but some memories are too vast, too quiet, and too dangerous for anyone to ever dare write them down again. These are not the memories found in books. They exist behind the scaffolding of society itself, in the hidden architecture where systems of power are built, run, and convinced of their own supremacy. What the Templars once did, and perhaps still do, is quietly lay the foundation stones of those very systems and then retreat into the shadows. In a world where information is fragmented, structure becomes the only vessel left to carry truth. The Templars understood this early. They didn't try to record everything they knew in writing. Texts can be burned, distorted, redacted. Instead, they chose to pass it down through systems. The greatest system they ever created wasn't a religion nor a military. It was the idea of the secret organization. Not secret in the sinister, world-controlling sense that films have glamorized, but secret in the oldest sense, to protect what is sacred from erosion by markets, politics, and momentary judgment. That's why, almost immediately after the Templars were erased, new organizations began to emerge, brotherhoods, nameless religious orders, cloistered circles of knowledge. They never claimed the name Templar, but they mirrored the same architecture, soft hierarchies, initiation rites, symbolic identifiers, and above all, the ability to survive any regime. Scholars now call this phenomenon layered memory architecture, systems designed not just to preserve knowledge, but to preserve how knowledge survives, a structure built for long-term endurance. If we look closely at the longest-lasting human institutions, from central banks to ancient universities, from parliaments to academic guilds, we find that many rest on principles the Templars tested centuries ago. Consider the components: cross-border networks, stateless presence, internal structure without government oversight, rituals to establish informal bonds, and operations grounded more in trust than in legal enforcement. This is the Templar DNA, and because that DNA lives on, their spirit never died. It merely changed form. There were moments in the 20th century when the world's largest institutions believed they were inventing something new: flexible organizational models, non-bank financial systems, decentralized governance. Few remembered that 800 years prior, a group of men had already enacted those things, not to run an empire, but to preserve a truth. Some modern analysts now refer to this as Templar thinking, the kind of system that adapts easily, requires no spotlight, and prioritizes ideals over leadership titles. In a world obsessed with personalization, this is rare, a structure not built around personalities, but a shared vision, a network where power derives not from authority, but from understanding. Thinking the kind of system that adapts easily requires no spotlight and prioritizes ideals over leadership titles. In a world obsessed with personalization, this is rare. It's a structure not built around personalities, but a shared vision, a network where power derives not from authority, but from understanding. And perhaps that is why the Templars were never replaced, because they never sought to dominate the stage of history. They built the stage itself. When power rises, they withdraw. When truth bends, they return, not to take control, but to rebalance what has tilted too far. We may never be able to prove the Templars stand behind any modern event, but we can see their fingerprints in how certain institutions function, in the structure of nameless organizations, and in the symbols that quietly return. And perhaps that's exactly what they hoped for, not recognition, not praise, but the faith that if truth ever falls into danger again, someone will remember them, not to resurrect an order, but to revive a structure where justice needs no campaign, truth needs no branding, and loyalty asks for no reward. In the heart of the Vatican, beyond the grandeur of the Sistine Chapel and the Apostolic Palace, lies a place few have ever set foot in. It is not marked by stained glass or marble, but by silence, a long, dim corridor guarded not by keys alone, but by absolute stillness. This is the center of the Vatican Secret Archives, home to over 80 kilometers of shelving holding centuries-old letters, verdicts, trial records, diplomatic notes, and papal decrees. And somewhere in a drawer labeled with an indecipherable code lies all that remains of the Knights Templar. Very little is publicly known about this section. Most of it remains classified, untranslated, unreleased. Yet scholars who've glimpsed its contents, like Barbara of Frail, insist the Vatican never destroyed the Templar files. They preserved them, not to honor the Templars, but perhaps because they feared the truth might one day return and would need to be controlled. In recent years, as fragments of the archives have been digitized and selectively released, the real revelations have not come from what's written, but from what isn't. Gaps in paragraphs, redacted sentences, missing documents that once bridged one page to the next, as if someone had tried to conceal but not completely erase, as if, in some unconscious act, the Vatican did precisely what the Templars once did, left truth behind, hidden in silence. The clearest example is the Pergamentum Chinon, the secret pardon issued by Pope Clement V to the Templar leadership. This document wasn't discovered in an announcement or press release. It was stumbled upon when a scholar accidentally misfiled it. Precisely what the Templars once did, leaving truth behind, hidden in silence. The clearest example is the Pergamentum Chinon, the secret pardon issued by Pope Clement V to the Templar leadership. This document wasn't discovered in an announcement or press release. It was stumbled upon when a scholar accidentally misfiled a request in the archive's internal system. In the parchment, Clement admits that the knights confessed under duress, that their testimonies were extracted through torture, and that he had absolved them. Yet this document was never used to overturn their convictions. Today, Dozens of independent researchers, universities, private circles, and documentary teams line up to access the Templar records. Each year, a few more pages are decoded, a few more secrets emerge, and slowly, the Knights Templar, burned in the fires of political power, are being restored by the light of knowledge. If one day the Vatican formally declares the Templars innocent, it will not change the past, but it will affirm what the Templars held fast to for centuries in silence. The truth cannot be burned, it can only be delayed until the world is brave enough to read it. Truth cannot be burned, it can only be delayed until the world is brave enough to read it. If you walk far enough through the layers of dust left by time, down the cold stone corridors of ancient fortresses, into locked libraries and codes that were never broken, you won't find the Templars as an organization anymore. There are no Grand Masters, no castles, no maps to hidden treasure. But you will begin to sense something like a faint warmth lingering on cold stone. They are still here, not in form, but in structure, not in name, but in way of life, and perhaps that is their final victory. The Knights Templar weren't destroyed because they did wrong, but because they did differently. They existed outside control, they operated on trust instead of decrees, they lived by discipline but bowed to no one, they believed in a truth that could not be bent, not by kings, not by popes, not by fire, and for that they had to be erased. But what power could not predict was this: you cannot burn a structure once it's been planted in the human mind. When Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake in 1314, he left no will, no final message, but according to witnesses, he looked directly at the king and pope, the men who condemned him, and said, "Both of you shall soon appear before the judgment of God." It wasn't a curse, it was a reminder that power may win the moment, but truth always waits its turn. And indeed, both King Philip IV and Pope Clement V died that same year. No one knows if it was coincidence or ancient justice, but the world remembered. From that moment on, the name Templar was no longer just a title, it became a symbol. A symbol of what? Of loyalty to ideals, even when every institution turns its back. Of disciplined order without surrendering to authority. Of knowledge and wisdom hidden, waiting for the right time. Of silent resistance, not with war, but with endurance. And above all, of a belief that nothing sacred needs to be protected with lies. And if the world still needs light, someone somewhere will always guard that flame, even in darkness. Today, you may no longer see white-cloaked knights riding across the hills, but you will find them in the doctor who refuses to bow to corrupt medical authority, in the engineer who writes code to fight mass surveillance, in the teacher who speaks truth even when the textbook says otherwise, in quiet individuals, unnamed, who still live by the principles of light. And if one day, amid the chaos of the world, you bow to the corrupt medical authority or to the engineer who writes code to fight mass surveillance, bow to the teacher who speaks truth even when the textbook says otherwise, or to the quiet, unnamed individuals who still live by the principles of light. If one day, amid the chaos of the world, you find yourself standing alone, facing the pressure to stay silent, to follow the crowd, to survive by submission, remember there was once an order that chose another way. They didn't live forever because they were strong. They lived forever because they dared to be vulnerable the right way. Because some things, when guarded by blood, by silence, by memory, cannot be erased, not by fire, not by time, not by power. They're just waiting for someone worthy to carry them forward. If you've listened this far, perhaps you feel the same as I do, that this world needs more stories that are deep, slow, and honest. I'm retelling what was forgotten, not with noise, but with quiet depth. If you believe these values are worth preserving, please consider subscribing, not just to keep listening, but to become part of the journey of keeping the flame alive, because somewhere within you, a silent night may be listening too. Thank you for being with me.